Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive into the Canadian real estate market. This time we're looking at January 2025. We've got this fascinating report from Dexter Realty. They focus mainly on the greater Vancouver area, but they do touch on the Fraser Valley a little bit as well. We're going to be unpacking some really interesting trends, like the impacts of all the political turmoil that's been going on and those trade war anxieties that are still kind of lingering. Plus, the Bank of Canada has a big interest rate decision coming up soon. Oh, and there's this surprising surge in new listings. So we're going to figure out what's really going on beneath the surface of all these numbers. And, of course, what it means for you.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting time to be looking at real estate. Like, we're not just looking at numbers on a page. There are some pretty big external factors that are affecting things.
For sure. And, the report actually starts off with some good news. Sales in January were up 9% compared to last year. I feel like that's a breath of fresh air after what they're calling the year of distraction. That was 2024.
Yeah, I mean, that follows a trend we were seeing at the end of 2024. Last quarter of 2024, we were starting to see things pick up. So it's not just a one-month thing, right?
That's good to hear. I was going to say that this report even suggests that maybe things are going back to normal a little bit, especially with those interest rates finally starting to come down.
Yeah, I think it's a psychological thing too, right? Makes people feel better when those interest rates go down. Suddenly buying a place seems more attainable, although we'll see what the Bank of Canada does in March. That's their next big interest rate announcement. Will they keep lowering them? It's a tough call with all the trade war stuff still up in the air. And then, the prime minister resigning. Who knows what's going to happen there?
There's a lot to consider, that's for sure. Okay, well, let's get into the numbers themselves then, especially here in Greater Vancouver. The report says that January sales were up 9% compared to January 2024. But here's the kicker. They were a whopping 51% higher than January 2023.
Wow. That's a big jump, especially for January, which is usually a pretty slow month. I think it shows that there's a lot of pent-up demand. All those buyers who were sitting on the sidelines for the last 2 years because of the high interest rates, they're finally ready to jump back in.
It really seems like it. The report talks about multiple offers happening again, and properties are selling super fast. Open houses are packed with people.
Yeah.
The market is definitely coming back to life.
Yeah, I think so. Like you said, those interest rates play a big role. When rates go down, your monthly payments are lower. All of a sudden, buying a place seems a lot more doable.
It makes a huge difference. Okay, but here's the thing that really surprised me. January also saw a record-breaking number of new listings, the highest for that month since all the way back in 2012. What's going on there?
That's a good question. I mean, maybe sellers are sensing the market's changing, and they want to take advantage of that. Or maybe it's those listings that got pulled off the market last year because of all the uncertainty. They're coming back now, but with higher prices.
That's a good point. So, okay, is now a good time to buy or sell? I mean, should buyers hurry up and get in before prices go even higher? Or should sellers wait and see what happens?
Well, it's not that simple. It really depends on the specific type of property you're looking at and the location, of course. For example, the report points out that townhomes are super competitive right now. There's just not enough supply. Builders haven't been building enough townhomes to meet demand.
Interesting. So does that mean detached homes are different then?
Yeah, there's actually a much bigger supply of detached homes on the market. So you might actually see a buyer's market for those, which means buyers could have more negotiating power.
So it really does depend on the property type. It seems like it's a very different story depending on what you're looking for. And then on top of that, you have to consider location too. The report mentions that North Vancouver and Port Coquitlam are still very much sellers markets.
Yeah, those are hot areas.
Especially for townhomes and condos. Port Coquitlam in particular has super low inventory for condos. So there's a lot of competition there.
Yeah, that's definitely something to keep in mind. But overall, I think those lower interest rates are going to help boost sales as we head into spring. Even with all the trade war stuff going on, that's good news for sellers, but it could also push prices up even more. So buyers need to be aware of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the report actually breaks things down even further. It goes into detail about all the different neighborhoods within Greater Vancouver. So you've got Vancouver West Side, Vancouver East Side, North Vancouver, West Vancouver, Richmond, all the Burnabys, East, North, and South, New West Coquitlam, Port Moody, Port Coquitlam, even out to Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge, Ladner, Solwauson. They've got data on everything. Units sold, active listings, new listings, months supply sales to listings ratio, even the house price index, which tracks how home values are changing over time.
Yeah, that's a lot of data.
Right.
Yeah.
And they look at month-over-month changes and even 6-month changes.
Yeah, so you can really get a sense of the trends in each area. Like, for example, month supply. That basically tells you how long it would take to sell all the current listings at the current pace of sales. If there's a high number of months supply, that usually means it's a buyer's market. And a low number means it's a seller's market. So, like Vancouver Westside has a month's supply of 10 right now, which puts it firmly in buyer's market territory. But then you look at North Van, their month's supply is only 4, so that's still a strong seller's market.
Wow, so even within Greater Vancouver, there's a lot of variation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And then you've got the house price index to consider, too. Some areas are seeing prices go up month over month, while others are seeing them decline. So it's not just about supply and demand. You really have to understand the nuances of each neighborhood.
It's like a giant puzzle, trying to figure out what all these numbers mean for buyers and sellers in each specific area.
Exactly.
Okay, so we talked a lot about Greater Vancouver, but what about the Fraser Valley? What's the picture looking like out there?
Well, it's a bit of a different story in the Fraser Valley. Sales are actually declining there, and new listings are going up. So it's looking more like a buyer's market out there. Month supply is at 8, and the house price index has been pretty flat lately.
Interesting. So very different from what we're seeing in some parts of Greater Vancouver. And to top it all off, the report reminds us that 2025 is still full of uncertainty.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we've got those political shifts, the trade tensions.
It's hard to predict what's going to happen.
It adds another layer of complexity to everything.
Definitely. This report gives us a good snapshot of where things are at right now. But it's just the beginning of the conversation.
Absolutely. There's so much more to unpack here, especially when we start to think about what it all means for you, the listener.
Exactly. And that's what we'll be digging into in part 2 of this deep dive. So stay tuned.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Rising sales, record new listings, those interest rates going down. But what does it all actually mean? Like, bottom line, is it a good time to buy or sell in Canada right now?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? The million-dollar question. And I think the answer is the same as always. It depends. But those lower interest rates are definitely good news for buyers, especially the ones who were priced out of the market before. I mean, lower rates mean lower monthly payments, and that can make a big difference.
So should buyers jump in now before rates start going back up? I mean, it almost feels like a race against time, especially with the report hinting that prices might start going up again soon.
Yeah, I get that. But don't forget, there are also way more listings on the market now, too, so buyers have more options. And that could help keep those price increases in check. It's a balancing act for sure.
Okay, so it's not as simple as just saying buy now or you'll miss out. What about sellers then? Are they in a good spot?
Again, it depends. If you're selling a detached home in an area with a lot of inventory, you might have to be a little more careful with your pricing. And you might have to put in a little more effort to market your property. But if you've got a townhome, especially in a hot area like North Vancouver, you're probably feeling pretty good right now.
It seems like the report's main takeaway is that real estate is not one size fits all.
Exactly.
Every neighborhood has its own little story going on.
Absolutely. It's all about those local market dynamics. Like if there's a lot of new development happening in an area, that's going to have a big impact on both inventory and prices. So you really have to understand what's happening at the hyper-local level.
And then on top of all that, you have those wildcard factors, like the trade war
Yeah.
and the whole political landscape. How do you even make sense of all that uncertainty when you're trying to make such a big decision?
Yeah, it's a lot to juggle. That's why I always recommend working with a good real estate professional, someone who really knows their stuff. They can help you navigate all the complexities of the market and help you make a more informed decision.
Speaking of navigating complexity, let's go back to those specific market breakdowns in the report for a minute. I'm curious about Vancouver East Side because the data shows that sales actually went down there compared to last year, which seems kind of strange considering the overall trend is upwards.
That is interesting. Maybe buyers in that area are just being more cautious. You know, with the trade war and all the political uncertainty, maybe they're taking a wait-and-see approach. Or maybe there are other things going on, like changes to zoning or development plans. It's definitely an area to keep an eye on.
Out of all the data and all the trends we've talked about, what surprised you the most in this report?
Honestly, I think it's the sheer number of new listings that came on the market in January. Like, that's really remarkable. It suggests that sellers are feeling a lot more confident now. Maybe they were all waiting for those interest rates to come down before they listed their properties.
So that could be contributing to the buyer's market we're seeing for detached homes in some areas.
Exactly.
It's all connected. And speaking of interest rates, the Bank of Canada's next announcement is coming up soon. Are they going to cut rates again? Are those trade talks going to fall apart? How's all this going to impact the market as we head into spring?
It's hard to say. but it's definitely something to watch closely.
It feels like we're on the edge of our seats.
I know, right? It just goes to show that real estate is constantly changing. There's no crystal ball. But we can look at the data, we can consider the different possibilities, and we can make the best decisions we can based on our own goals and our own risk tolerance.
It's almost exciting in a way, like we're on the cusp of something big. The market's holding its breath, waiting to see what happens next.
It is exciting, and it reminds us that real estate is about more than just numbers. It's about people's lives, their dreams, their hopes for the future.
And speaking of different types of homes, the report also highlighted some trends for townhomes and condos. Townhomes are still super popular. Sales are up year over year in most areas. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think townhomes are kind of the sweet spot for a lot of buyers. They're bigger than condos, so you get more space and more privacy. But they're usually more affordable than detached homes, and they don't require as much upkeep. Plus, they're often located in really great neighborhoods with good schools and amenities.
Yeah, they're kind of the Goldilocks of housing options.
Yeah.
Not too big, not too small, just right. But let's not forget about condos. They're still a very popular choice,
Yeah.
especially for first-time buyers and investors.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Condos are a great way to get into the market. And let's be honest, who doesn't love a condo with view?
I know I do. But it's important to remember that these market trends are always evolving.
Absolutely.
What's true today might not be true tomorrow.
That's why it's so important to stay informed. Do your research and be prepared to adjust your strategy as needed.
Well said. This has been quite the deep dive.
It has.
We've talked about interest rates, trade wars, neighborhood trends, property types. It's a lot to take in.
It is.
But we're not quite done yet. There's one more layer we need to explore. The psychology of buying and selling real estate.
Oh, yes. The human element.
Exactly. We can talk about numbers and trends all day long, but ultimately, real estate decisions are very personal. And they're often driven by emotions.
Very.
Things like fear of missing out, market hype, even just gut feelings. Those can all play a huge role in the choices people make.
Absolutely. And understanding those psychological factors can be just as important as understanding the data.
Well, that sounds fascinating. We'll have to unpack all of that in part 3 of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our Canadian real estate deep dive. We've talked about all the numbers, all the trends, but now it's time to get into the psychology of it all. Because real estate isn't just about bricks and mortar, is it?
No, it's not. It's about so much more than that. It's about people's lives, their dreams, their hopes for the future.
Exactly. Buying or selling a home is a huge decision. I mean, you're talking about finding a place where you can build a life, put down roots.
Yeah, it's a very emotional thing.
And those emotions can really affect how people behave in the market.
For sure. Even the report mentions that. You know how there was that surge in buyer activity in January? Part of that was probably because of those lower interest rates. But it's not just about the money, is it? It's also about that shift in psychology. People are starting to feel more optimistic, like maybe now is the time to buy.
So you're saying emotions can sometimes override logic? Like people make decisions based on how they're feeling, rather than thinking things through rationally.
Yeah, sometimes. Like, remember all that stuff we talked about before? The trade war, the political uncertainty, all that fear can create a sense of urgency. People start thinking they need to buy now before things get even worse.
Oh, so that's where that whole FOMO thing comes in, fear of missing out.
Exactly. But fear can also work the other way, too. It can make sellers hesitant to list their properties.
Yeah, that makes sense. People might worry about not getting a good price or not being able to find a new place to live.
Exactly. It's a tough balance.
So how do you navigate all that? How do
Yeah.
you make sure you're making smart decisions and not just reacting out of fear or FOMO?
Well, I think the first step is to just acknowledge those emotions. Don't try to ignore them. Just try to understand where they're coming from. Like, are you feeling pressured by something? Are your expectations realistic? Are you letting fear cloud your judgment?
So it's all about being self-aware and not letting your emotions take over completely.
Right.
And it probably helps to have someone you trust to talk to, like a good real estate agent.
Oh, yeah, definitely. A good agent can be invaluable. They can give you objective advice, help you weigh the pros and cons, and ultimately help you make a decision that's right for you.
I think that's a good takeaway from all of this. The data is important, the trends are interesting, but you can't forget about the human element.
Right. At the end of the day, the market is made up of people. And people make decisions based on all sorts of things, their finances, their personal situation, their emotions.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the Canadian real estate market. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
Interest rates, trade wars, neighborhood trends, property types, even a little bit of psychology.
This is a good discussion.
I hope you learned something, and I hope you're feeling a little more prepared to navigate the market, whether you're buying or selling.
I hope so too.
But before we go, I want to leave you with something to think about. This report was all about what's happening right now. But what about the long term? How do you think things like climate change and technology are going to affect the market in the years to come?